Hello, welcome to Books in the World. My name is Richard Bodertha and I'll be your host today. We're here, of course, with Wendy Walker, the author of All Is Not Forgotten, a psychological thriller that has just been sold to Warner Brothers. And Reese Witherspoon is going to play one of the characters. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Just very briefly, I believe the paperback of the novel is going to come out fairly soon as well.
July 18th, a paperback will be out with a brand new cover, so we're very excited about that.
Okay. And it was sold out in Hollywood.
It was. It all happened very quickly. The same week the book sold for the U.S. publication rights, we sold the option to Warner Brothers with Reese Witherspoon attached to both produce and with the option also to play one of the main characters in the book. So it was very exciting.
It's published by St. Martin's, is that correct?
Yes.
Which is normally, I know not exclusively, but a mystery publishing house. Now this is more or less in the psychological thriller category.
It is. They publish all sorts of novels across many genres, and psychological thrillers have really become a subgenre in the mystery genre, and they have taken on a life of their own. We have a lot of readers who really enjoy them, and I've sort of found a little niche in that subgenre. So hopefully,
what brought you
it's a
there?
career. So I started out writing 17 years ago. I was a stay-home mom. I had taken time off from practicing law, actually, and I needed something to do. I was out in the suburbs, and for anyone who's familiar with Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique, and it was all these case studies about former working women who then were home with kids, and I had read that book in college, and I felt that same sense of just being lost every day, loving my child and wanting to be with him, but I needed something to do that was more than just a hobby or charity work. And I'd always thought about writing a novel, and I'd thought about writing a legal thriller because I was a lawyer, so that seemed like, so I didn't start out writing thrillers. I started out writing a legal thriller and then women's fiction, and I got 2 books published initially.
Well, even before the writing, you do have quite an extensive background. I believe you, of course, went to law school, but you also went to the London School of Economics?
I did.
And you were an investment banker for a while.
Yes, at Goldman Sachs. So I did the 2 years there as an analyst in mergers and acquisitions, and then I went to law school, and then all of a sudden just slammed on the brakes and moved to the suburbs to have kids. So yeah, it's been a very interesting path.
What were your prior books like? You call them women's fiction.
Yeah.
So they weren't really mysteries, or they weren't thrillers?
Not at all. They were this whole genre that came out of what they call chick lit, but it was for sort of more, the chick lit characters who've now grown up, and now they're married, and they have kids, and they have more grown-up issues. And so they're lighter fiction. They're not literary per se, but it's stories about women and their families and their marriages. And I got 2 of those published with St. Martin's, but they didn't really take off. So when I found myself a single mom and I needed a career again, and I went back to practicing law, but it was very hard to give up this dream. So I thought I had one last book in me, and I had a wonderful, wonderful agent who saw sort of this dark edge to my writing and this new genre cropping up, and she said, why don't you just go for that? And I did, and it just was like a perfect marriage of a genre and an idea that I had.
Well, it's an exciting book. It certainly has a lot of narrative profundity or exuberance, I guess. I couldn't really wait to see what happened next. Psychological thrillers, they now have a special category that they call, what is that over in England?
Griplit. Griplit, yes, okay. Because they're so gripping.
Well, this certainly is. And it's obviously attracted Hollywood. and I'm sure you're having very good success with it. Can you give us a little bit of an idea, not so much whether or not it's based on any of your personal experiences, but the family involved? Let's start from building the house, so to speak.
Yes. So I initially had the idea for the basic plot. And from there, I wanted there to be just a lot of other characters and substance to it other than just the driving plot. And that is really what psychological thrillers give you. You are inside the minds of the characters. So the family, the mother and the father of this teenage girl who is the victim of a horrible crime, I wanted to examine some issues that most people encounter at one point or other in their lives. A trouble with marriage, just trying to figure out how they handle the past with the present life that they've chosen. And so I took those issues and sort of blew them up and pushed them to the brink. And it's been wonderful because I've had a lot of women in particular identifying with the mother, Charlotte, because she has this past that isn't quite integrated into her current life. And what happens to her daughter really just makes that explode, and all the pieces come falling down around her. And so that was a fun area to explore, as well as, you know, sort of the driving plot of the mystery.
Well, the mother seems very well put together. She builds what you call a moral house.
Yes.
But obviously she's got a backstory from her youth.
Yes.
And I think her memories from her youth obviously trigger a lot of what she does, what her actions are throughout the movie. But such is the case with all of the characters, even the narrator.
Yes.
And the narrator, before we get too much further along, is what we call, an unreliable
narrator, exactly. Yeah.
So that is very suspenseful in that you don't know so much whether or not the narrator is telling the truth.
Exactly.
Because the narrator also has a vested interest in this, because at one point, the narrator feels that his son might have done or perpetrated the crime.
That's right.
And the narrator, being a doctor of psychology, I believe, has a lot of power.
Yes.
And power is an issue that you explore throughout these relationships. Can you talk a little bit about that? First off, let's break the relationships down. Who are the people involved in the story? There's the family, there's the daughter.
There's the daughter, Jenny Kramer, her father, Tom, and her mother, Charlotte. Then you have the doctor, Dr. Forrester.
Right, he's the narrator.
He's the narrator. And then you have another patient of his who is a former Navy SEAL. His name is Sean. And he has been given the same treatment to erase the memory of a trauma that he suffered in combat.
By the same treatment, you mean that the young daughter,
Yes.
after being victimized by this crime, is given that drug.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that drug? And
Absolutely, yeah.
I know it probably started with the military, where we've tried to erase some of the PTSD, the memories that, but it's evolved a little bit more into the civilian practice too.
Absolutely. So the idea for this book, I actually came across in 2010. An article in the New York Times was examining this new data that had come out, which was drawing this connection between PTSD and the use of high doses of morphine in the field immediately after a trauma. And they were finding that the soldiers who were able to get that morphine very quickly had lower rates and severity of PTSD. That, combined with what they were learning about memories, how they are stored and how we recall them, all came together, and they started to realize that the emotional component of a memory can actually be altered. And they thought, what a great idea for not just soldiers in the field, but what if we applied this to civilians? What if we applied it to anyone who suffered a trauma? And I immediately thought, wow, what if you were the victim of a crime and you had to make that decision? Because being a lawyer, I knew enough. I never did criminal law, but we all watch enough CSI to know
Sure.
that you can just see a witness on the stand with the prosecutor, and trying to get the testimony, and then the defense attorney saying, well, wait a minute, weren't you given medication to alter your memory? Oh, well, yeah, it was just the emotional component. Well, how do you know? And so what if you had to make that choice of compromising your ability to get justice with being able to reduce your emotional trauma from this crime? So I took it a little bit further, and I said, what if science actually goes where they think it can go, which is to not just mitigate the emotional component of a memory, but to actually erase the factual components. And they do think they're going to be able to do this. And it sounds wonderful. I mean, imagine being the victim of a horrible car accident, or you witness someone dying, or the victim of sexual abuse as a child. If you could, through therapy, recall those memories and have them erased, just that memory of that trauma, wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, the book sort of goes into that. Would it be wonderful? And what if it meant giving up justice? And so
By
that's
giving up
the
justice, you
basis.
mean without the memory, obviously. You can't remember faces, you can't
Yes.
remember the scene.
Yes.
Things that are very particular to
That's right.
a prosecution of a crime.
That's right.
Now, the one in the family, obviously, who was given this drug was the younger daughter, 15,
Yes.
Jenny. And she is found in the woods after being victimized
Yes.
by a rapist, actually.
Yes.
And how does it begin? This narrator is treating her.
Yes.
He's treating her. He is, and he's also treating the mother and father.
Right, because frequently when you are treating, especially a child or a teenager even, it's a holistic process. So the whole family will be a part of that process.
And one of the other characters is being treated simultaneously.
Yes.
Initially, he's quite separate. He's the military veteran,
Yes.
Sean. But there's an interplay there too.
Yes.
And we get into the idea of power, and I don't want to destroy or spoil the plot drive, but the narrator, of course, has plenty of power to reconsolidate memories.
Yes.
Because the mother and father argue about whether or not the
Yes.
memories should be erased from their daughter.
And
The
that-
father's very keen on justice.
That's right.
The mother just wants to move on
That's right.
initially.
Initially, and the mother, and so this is where all of the characters' psyches come into play, and their past, their childhoods, and their past traumas. And when I was thinking about this book, I thought, what if you had to choose? And then I thought, well, what if you had to choose for your child? Because it's one thing to live with the consequences of a decision for yourself, but if your child has to live with those consequences. And then I thought, well, what if you had a difference of opinion? And what if the opinions and the views were driven by not so much the facts in the moment, but by your own needs that you're not even aware of? So for the mother, she's built this perfect life because she did not have a perfect childhood, which she has told no one about. And her perfect life cannot tolerate what's happened to her daughter. So she is driven by forces that are far more powerful than, just thinking about the facts and the medical advice. She just knows in her gut that this is intolerable to this perfect life she's built. The father, who grew up with sort of this anemic ego because of his parents, he feels that he has not protected his child, and he wants justice. So the thought that she might wake up and not be able to recognize this attacker, and they're in a small town, and it was at a house party with all these students from the high school, so it could be someone walking among them, and she might never know, and that terrifies him. Of course, the mother wins out, and then the story takes off from there. Not only finding the rapist, but also the fracturing with the parents.
Right. Okay. It is a fascinating story, and as I said, very spine-tingling, actually. How did you get the voice of the narrator? It's a male doctor.
Yeah.
Did you have any background in psychology?
Well, as an attorney, I was actually a family law attorney
Yeah.
in my second legal career. And I had some training as a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney who represents children in a custody situation. And we do a lot of training, just enough to make me dangerous because I know don't have formal training. But the great thing as a writer is I know enough about these little issues that to know where there could be a story, and then I go and research it further. So when I was writing The Doctor, I did do some research on all of the issues and how he would treat the mother and treat the father and how he would approach them and talk to them. And also, of course, with Jenny, and he tries to recover her memory. So he works with her on that. But his voice, I just started writing him, and I started having a lot of fun making him extremely arrogant, but then sometimes he pulls back and has great compassion. And I wanted to build that tension so sometimes the readers just, want to strangle him, and sometimes they feel compassion for him and he, as the story evolves, because he is unreliable, you get bits and pieces of his backstory. And that's where the title came from, All Is Not Forgotten, because Jenny, whose memory is erased, but still lives with this visceral, physical pain from what's occurred, and also the knowledge that she's been raped. And that's the other thing we forget, that there are a lot of survivors of crime, in particular sexual assault, who have no memory of the event because they were intoxicated or roofies. We've all heard about that. They still suffer emotionally, just knowing that this has happened to them. So Jenny, all is not forgotten, but her mother, her past has not been forgotten. The father, his past cannot be forgotten. The doctor, his past cannot be forgotten. And all of those past traumas and the baggage we carry with us enter into our lives in ways that we don't even know.
The body has its own memory.
The body has its own memory, and the
In
psyche
other words,
as well.
What the psyche or what the brain doesn't recall, although it's been filed, the file's been erased, so to speak.
Yes, right.
But the body, these things surface nonetheless.
They often have triggers, and we don't even know sometimes why we suddenly feel anxiety about something that doesn't really seem related to anything factually in our past. But there is some connection in there to some event that caused us pain.
Now, you spoke to some experts on this,
Yes.
and I think you give them a thank you in your
Yes.
acknowledgments. Can you talk about your experience with these scientists and about the memory?
So what's great now being an author, especially in these genres, is that you can go online and not just get, Wikipedia, but you can actually get scientific journals and the reports and findings that are written for other scientists. And they're a little bit hard to navigate sometimes because they use terms that are, not in my wheelhouse. But you can get enough to then know what questions to ask. And then you can also find the experts and actually contact them. So I worked with a woman in my community who's has 2 PhDs, and she's a wonderful therapist to trauma victims. So I made sure that I had described the therapy process correctly. But for the memory science, I found a woman who was doing current memory science research and was writing a book. And I sent her the segments of the book where I had described it to make sure I'd gotten it right. Because it's fascinating science. And actually, anyone who's interested in memory, all of these issues involving memory, this area is absolutely exploding. And the things we know now, and this is the one that freaks me out the most, and I think most people who hear this are very surprised, but then it makes sense, that every time we remember anything, we are basically pulling little files from many parts of our brain, from sight, sound, relationships, weather, like all the little pieces of that memory have to get pulled together, and they come into on the screen of our mind. And while they're there, they are subject to being changed because they have to be put back. And while they're out there, our brain actually does change them, even if it's just subtle. And they think this is for survival reasons, because memories are really just useful to us if they inform us about our lives now. And this is why you can sit around with family members and everyone will remember something from your childhood, and they'll remember it differently, and sometimes very differently. But it'll be the same theme, the same event, but it'll be your brother who pushed your sister off the swing and not your sister who pushed your brother. And it's your mother who was home and your father who was at the store. But everyone will remember the facts differently because they have been reconsolidated over all of those years.
Well, the narrator knows this.
He knows this, yes.
And one of the reasons that we, the reader, feel compassion for him, if that was your intent,
Yes.
is his way of protecting his own, the way he protects his son.
Yes, yes.
And what he does
Yes.
to protect his son is sort of become involved in those memories of Jenny
Yes.
while they're open, before they're reconsolidated.
Yes. Yep.
He calls himself a mad Frankenstein, and in some respect, I suppose that's apt.
Yeah, so he does become compromised, and it causes him a great deal of pain because he does have this very powerful ego, and he wants to cure Jenny, and he wants to cure Sean, who is his, favorite person in the world, the Navy SEAL, and then he's faced with his child. And his child starts to become implicated, and that is, an internal struggle for him. And I was hoping to make readers stop and think, what would I do to protect my own child? What if that were me, and I was having to compromise my professional life or even harm someone else to protect my child? How far would you go? So that is a big theme in the book as well.
And he has some interplay with the police detective as well.
Yes. So when I was structuring the novel, I had the idea of the memory science. I knew the girl, I knew her family, but one of the things my agent said was that people are loving this unreliable narrator told in the first person. And I thought to myself, well, how am I going to tell this story? Because I really wanted to get into the minds of all of these characters, the emotional stuff going on that they wouldn't just tell to anyone. How is one person going to know that? And I thought, well, it could be an investigator, but they wouldn't necessarily tell an investigator all of these things, but a therapist. And that's where I got the idea to write the narrator as the psychiatrist, and everything flowed from there.
Did you, speaking of the movie now, which is in development, I believe, or is it?
It is, yes. So they have written, the script is written, and
Yeah.
I don't hear much. Everybody asks me this, and aside from a wonderful conversation I had with Reese Witherspoon, I've had very little interplay with Warner Brothers or the movie. So
What attracted Reese Witherspoon to the book?
she loved Charlotte, the mother, and she is in now into these roles playing very complex women characters. And Big Little Lies, which was just a huge success on HBO, which was based on a novel, she plays a very complex female character. And she loved Charlotte. The good Charlotte, bad Charlotte is one of the themes that comes out. And she loved the fact that there is a woman being portrayed with that kind of complexity. She's neither good nor bad. She has pieces of both, and don't we all? And that is something that is starting to come into our media more and more in film and television, but it really has been absent for many years.
Just while we wrap up here, just one quick question. I'm sure you get asked this a lot. Um, what advice would you give to somebody starting out in a writing career?
So this is probably going to be very controversial among my fellow authors, but I think that you have to try to marry your talents, your passion, and what you want to write about with what people want to read. And sometimes you can create a whole new genre and you can reinvent the wheel and no one's thought of it, and that's fantastic. And if you have an idea that you think will do that, that's great. But sometimes you have to also get your foot in the door. You have to get through all of the gatekeepers who are, doing their best to give readers what they want and what will be interesting to them. And so you have to be a little market savvy, as well as staying true to your voice and the story you want to tell. For me, I feel that there are many ways to tell my stories, and I found a way in this medium to bring in all of these complex characters and to write really complex women in this genre that that people are enjoying.
Looking back through history, what book would you have liked to have written?
Oh, wow. Wuthering Heights, I would have to say. One of my favorite books, and just
Great book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've given us a great gift here. This is a terrific book. It's called All Is Not Forgotten. These are the final words in the book as well. Did you have the title first or the final words?
I had the title, and then decided to end with the those words.
Okay. Well, the paperback is coming out in July, and the second psychological thriller is called Emma in the Night, and
Yes.
that's out in August.
In August.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Wendy.
you. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.